So thank you so much. I will start with a case, and then we will discuss it a bit through the case and a bit afterwards. It's a real patient of mine who had 30 years at the time of transplant and was transplanted for Philadelphia acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Very soon, actually, that was a transplant after a myeloablative conditioning from his sister. His early course was insignificant, but actually very early developed a very impressive acute GVHD of the skin with acute inflammation that we do not really see that often. But it did react very well to 2 milligram per kilo steroids. And we were able to taper those steroids rather quickly, although the GVHD occurred early around day 25, so the whole tapering process took a while. He stopped steroids around day 85, and approximately 4 weeks after stopping steroids, so just around day 100, at the territory of previous acute GVHD, as it usually happens, chronic changes occurred. He had also mild eye and mouth symptoms, but his skin was really looking impressive, and you will see that just in a second. So we restarted steroids, and he was still on cyclosporine, not high levels as it was around day 100, but we had to increase cyclosporine as well. So this is him. Actually, the thing you cannot see very well, and it was really impressive, maybe you can see it in following photos, is actually the infiltration that he had in his skin of his face, and that was, you cannot see the third dimension, but although it looked like chronic GVHD, it really had an active component. And actually, it already looked like steroids are going to be there either for a long time, or we should do something to be able to taper off steroid quickly, knowing that ECP works well in the skin, and knowing the fact that, that we had good experience with ECP, we started it rather quickly and started per our institutional protocol, which was 1 cycle or 2 consecutive procedures weekly during the first month. During the first month, absolutely nothing happened, but that's good and that's bad, but good as well, because there was no progression to sclerotic features. We all know always when there is chronic GVHD with such activity that at the end this inflammation could, let's say, repair itself into fibrosis. But in this first month, although there was no clinical improvement, the fact that there was no clinical progression either helped us actually get rid of the steroids, because he did had lots of toxicities due to the steroid therapy. And decided then to, again, per institutional protocol, decrease the ECP to every 2 weeks, 1 cycle. At that time, he started imatinib as well, not because of GVHD, but because he had a Philadelphia positive ALL. And 3 months after, and you can see a bit better, his face was still, let's say, looking horrible. He had a really, really severe, it's really rarely seen such a severe form of skin GVHD. But this was stable, so let's say I was okay with the fact that he's on ECP, which is not particularly immunosuppressive, and apart that has only 1 immunosuppressive agent, and his skin is not progressing to sclerosis. Per institutional protocol, then we continued with ECP monthly. Actually, first improvement was seen at month 6, which is not so strange from what we have learned from the studies. At that point, he was still on cyclosporine because we were never able to, of course, decrease it because the disease was stable, and he continued ECP monthly. He continued imatinib because, of course, it is used for 1 year or 2 years after transplant as maintenance therapy for Philadelphia positive ALL. At 6 months, there was some improvement, but this improvement has actually continued. You can I don't know how well, but his face was really getting clean. It was cleaning itself, let's so say, from chronic GVHD. We continued ECP, and actually at month 12, ECP was continued until month 12, when we had to stop actually due to pandemics, because at that time he was not living near the institution where we treated him, so therefore he could not travel and we had to stop ECP. Imatinib was continued for 3 more months and then stopped, because this is how we did it for maintenance therapy. And skin continued to improve during this period. He was still on cyclosporine, but you could maybe say, okay, his chronic GVHD became, or the immunological tolerance has emerged, and chronic GVHD was over. But actually, at that point, we had seen some new GVHD in form of ocular chronic GVHD. So there was an obvious effect of the treatment that he was given. So what I wanted to highlight from this case, and we'll go a bit into details with the other part of the presentation, is what I think and what I think I have learned from this case, is that early introduction of ECP maybe did not work at once, but I strongly believe that with having such a severe form of chronic GVHD, it stopped progression. During all that time, he had no infections. We did it in an ambulatory way, so as an outpatient, he was never hospitalized for infections, and patients do get severely ill with infections in chronic GVHD and suffer a lot. At 3 months, there were no improvements, but on the other hand, we were able to taper off steroids. The first improvement was seen after 6 months, and the improvement continued, not just for a month or two, but through whole 6 months afterwards. And of course, the hypothesis is that this combination with imatinib may have a synergistic effect. So, when we talk about steroid refractory chronic GVHD and an idea to maybe potentially use ECP, I think there are several questions that we need to ask ourselves. Well, first of all, in steroid refractory chronic GVHD, what do we have available? Which agents are really used in the real-life setting, so not the approved agents, but the ones that are used? What does the literature say about the ECP? What do we know about the biological background of GVHD, and let's say the biological background of GVHD in our patient? And what do we know about specific clinical context about our patients? So we've mentioned this, well, many times already today, and you know all that. You know what are the approved agents, although, of course, we have to say that in Europe we have only ruxolitinib approved in this setting. But I think beside, let's say, somehow comparable overall responses and maybe more used failure-free survival, the intermediate outcome endpoint that we use in newer chronic GVHD clinical trials, because, of course, it is too long to wait for overall survival, and overall response is a short-term outcome. This is an endpoint that also, of course, enabled clinical trials thanks to the NIH consensus and gave us these drugs among other things. So overall responses, let's say, and failure-free survivals are comparable between these drugs. If I listed them in a table, you could see it maybe better, but I didn't use that slide. Anyway, even if the setting is not the same, because belumosudil is usually used as the third line. But what we also have to have in mind is the incidence of adverse events. And I think we can all agree that ibrutinib, even though it was first approved among all these drugs, was never used like we thought it would be used in chronic GVHD. And I think this is from the experience that it is often discontinued due to adverse events. This is some of the real experience that we cannot show. When it comes to ruxolitinib, Of course, main problems here are cytopenias and infections. But when it comes to discontinuation of treatment, 16% in the REACH3 trial stopped treatment because of adverse events. And similarly, 12% of belumosudil patients stopped the treatment because of adverse events. So in comparison, rate of adverse event, it is somehow similar. Although we also remember that patients with severe cytopenia, patients with severe infections, are the patients where maybe we will think twice before including ruxolitinib, although we do know that thrombocytopenia can also be one form of chronic GVHD, and that solely should not be a contraindication. There's also one other thing I think we should take in mind, and that is how fast these drugs work, because sometimes we need, of course, a drug that works faster. And for sure, that is going to be ruxolitinib because it, let's say, decreases the cytokine storm in usually several weeks. It has been shown that belumosudil median time to response is about 5 weeks, and almost everybody responds in 2 months. But I think we can all agree that usually in chronic GVHD we are not rushing to get results. It is not the case as it is in acute GVHD. Okay, so we know which agents are approved, and then what is actually used? Well, for sure, as ruxolitinib being the only agent approved in Europe, we cannot expect other agents to be used so much. But actually, this is a survey from the Transplant Complications Working Party that was conducted before all those drug approvals. Only ibrutinib was approved by FDA. It was conducted among EBMT centers, and 105 centers responded in 33 countries. And as you can see, half of these patients at that time were, half of the centers had patients including in clinical trials. 2/3 of centers had a standard operating procedure on how to work with steroid refractory chronic GVHD, and only 1/3, which is I think interesting, had a multidisciplinary team to take care of these patients in the best possible way. The practice of treatment in second line was extremely heterogeneous, but this was even before the approval of ruxolitinib. ECP and ruxolitinib were already the most used agents, probably based on some retrospective data. At that time, ibrutinib, which was approved, was actually, as you can see, at the place 6, so really never entered the clinical practice like we thought it might. So the next question I would like to ask myself, what about ECP in steroid refractory chronic GVHD? What does the literature say? Well, we have seen some of the studies by my colleagues previously, but I've summarized it in retrospective data, prospective data, and consensus documents. Retrospective data is mainly small, uncontrolled studies with different endpoints and treatment regimens. You can see that number of patients is extremely varying. Also the start of treatment is very variable. Some patients are close to the diagnosis of GVHD, some were 2 years afterwards. The schedule, the duration, everything was so heterogeneous and very hard to analyze. But there are, I think, 2 main points that we learned from retrospective data is the excellent safety profile of ECP, and the fact that there were improvements in different organs, but mainly maybe having an idea that ECP mostly works in skin, hepatic, ocular, oral, and then pulmonary involvement in that order. Also, we know that first effect happens pretty slow when it comes to ECP. What about prospective data? Well, there were, and I'm talking of the steroid refractory setting, so several prospective studies, one randomized trial that Florent already mentioned, and this was the study of Professor Flowers. And I have to say, this study, if I remember it right, used a very very strict regimen, let's say. So the ECP was done actually every week for the first 12 weeks, but also the evaluation was done at 12 weeks. And actually the skin responses were not significantly better. But one of the conclusions from this study was that this happened because actually the evaluation was done too early. And then afterwards, 29 patients that were in the other arm that were not treated with the ECP continued with ECP and did it for 24 weeks this time. And this time, the responses were significantly better. So this was in confirming this idea that ECP, especially in cutaneous GVHD, should be continued for 6 months. Also, exclusively, all data almost show that ECP helps to spare steroids, as actually I showed in my patient as well. One of the most recent data is the prospective multi-center data by Gantelman in 2018. And this study included a respectable number of around 70 patients. And what was exclusively different in this study, that the response was assessed by NIH criteria and by clinicians. And this response was completely different because when evaluated by the NIH, the responses were 6% complete remissions. This is what you see on the figure on the left, and 38% of partial remissions. While when clinicians assessed it, the response was much more, so 14% and 48% in partial remissions. The clinician assessed response you can see on the right, because here significantly was different also the global severity score and also the total skin score. When these analyses were separately analyzed, it was seen that actually, when analyzed by NIH, there were no difference of responders to non-responders, so none of the previously known, let's say, risk factor for non-respondings were not confirmed here, and all had steroid-sparing effect, if not significant response. And when responders and non-responders were analyzed in the group of clinician-assessed response, these responders were, let's say, doing better in general, were better at the beginning, and had shorter time from transplant to study entry. So what else was seen here, that responders were the one with erythema, and the non-responders were basically one with sclerosis. So this is one of the questions that Mohammed asked, is that, does that mean that ECP should be started early before fibrosis develops? There's only one another thing that I would like to comment from this study, and that probably is true that ECP should be started early. But also, what is the reason why clinicians see it better? Not maybe because they want to see it better, but because the NIH criteria actually looks at the body surface area. And when you are a clinician and you are seeing a patient like I was seeing, and I see in front of my eyes that his third dimension of sclerosis is, of GVHD is decreasing, or the sclerosis is getting softer, I would maybe say this is a response, and it would not be a response according to the NIH criteria. When it comes, I think the most, let's say, controversial in ECP is how to use it. So nobody knows. Traditionally, it is used as a cycle, so 2 sequences, but there is no proof that 2 sequences are better than 1 sequences, and also there is no proof that any regimen, so starting it once weekly, starting it once bi-weekly, and then going to once bi-weekly, once monthly, works better. How heterogeneous is the practice is seen from these guidelines. So definitely I cannot, let's say, state for any of the guidelines. I can only show you the ones that I like. And this is the recent Nordic group guidelines, because they seem so logical to me. First of all, there is 1 sequence every 2 weeks, and the evaluation is done at 3 months. Once you have a complete remission, you stop ECP. If you have a partial remission, you reduce it by 2 weeks. If you have progression, you stop ECP as well. The only difference is for lung GVHD and scleroderma, where you continue ECP for at least 6 months. This is the right part, and do the same. If there is complete remission, stop ECP. If there is progression, stop as well. And if there is a partial remission, reduce the frequency. Also, it is stated, of course, that you should definitely, and that's shown in all studies, stop or taper steroids. And of course, you do not do it at the same time. You do not reduce ECP while reducing other immunosuppression. And one other thing also here are the contraindications and precautions, which is, of course, also something, part of the clinical context that I'm mentioning. So what patients you will not consider for ECP? Well, of course, some of the patients that have photosensitivity, and I think the main thing here is the low blood count, which will probably be the contraindication for ECP, because this is what you take away, right, cells, and then modify them. While precautions should be taken in low platelet, in active infection, but this is something that is to be precautious, but not usually stop, because of course you can always give platelets to the patient who need them, and then do the ECP. Florent has mentioned this already, and I think today this is basically something that makes sense. So because of the fact that with second-line treatment we mostly have partial remissions, we need to do something to do better. It seems maybe hard to increase, to give to another immunosuppressive treatment. So this is, I think, where ECP's place in the future or in the present is, and that is combination therapy to improve partial responses. And I don't need to go into details here because Florent nicely showed you the combination treatment in 23 patients analyzed by Professor Zeisser's group. But what I want to say here is that this treatment was not started simultaneously at the same time, but one was added on another, so it was not the start at once of both of these treatments, but still responses were pretty good, as Florent already showed, and responses were seen anytime between, I think, 2 and 28 weeks, of course, because they do not work equally fast. The survival was also pretty impressive, and also the side effects that we were maybe fearing from the most, as infection and cytopenia, were not, but that's of course logical knowing how ECP works. How this actually works? Well, the point is not, let's say, targeting the same thing, and ECP and JAK inhibition, well, they are obviously complementary, because JAK inhibition decreases differentiation of Th17, activation of dendritic cells, while ECP induces tolerogenic mechanisms, which are not as similar to ruxolitinib, which could then lead to therapeutic synergism. So this is the biological background which I want to mention. We today really know well how chronic GVHD develops. We know the first phase, which is always translocation on PABs, activation of dendritic cells. Then we have phase 2, which is down here, and that is activated dendritic cells activating T and B cells. And then there is phase 3, which we always want to avoid in GVHD, and that is activation of macrophages, PDGF, TGF, extracellular deposition of matrix, also immunoglobulin deposition, and finally fibrosis. Why is that important? Because then we know what are we targeting, and of course this is how drugs are being developed. We know that in the second phase is the ROCK inhibition, is the BTK inhibition. In fibrosis, TKIs work because they block PDGF. There's some data on targeting plasma cells, and so on and so on. And how ECP works? Well, we of course know we take the product and then we expose it to methoxsalen and UVA light, and then we refuse it to the patient. So what does it really happen? Do we get rid of the alloreactive T cells? Well, actually no, only 5 to 10% of these cells undergo apoptosis. And what really happens is getting these parts of the cells, let's say, naked, induces tolerogenic disease, dendritic cells, which then may induce tolerance regeneration of Tregs. This is how it is thought that actually ECP works. And there are some data, although there are some contradictory data as well, and that is this seen on the right, that actually increase in Tregs can be seen already as after 3 weeks, and then continues to grow to after 3 months after starting ECP. What is really interesting, I think, in terms of ECP, is that slowing the alloreactive process can result in immune reconstitution. So slowing down the reactive process may help this patient recover CD4, CD8, so the things that we are usually following in these patients, especially the ones that are severely immunosuppressed. And on the right, you can see the study where responders to ECP really have significantly higher CD4 and CD8 cells in comparison to the non-responders. And final question is, what do we know about specific clinical context when we are thinking about ECP? Well, first of all, we need to know which organ are we targeting. We know there are sclerotic and lung GVHD that are possibly, that are very hard organs to treat. And although we have ruxolitinib, for example, in the second-line setting, I liked what Bipin said the other day, that these are the settings where we might in the future think of introducing still, for example, belumosudil, because it has been shown that it really works well even in third line in joints and fascia. Also, there are some encouraging data for lung as well. And in a heterogenetic disease as chronic GVHD, which attacks literally all, every organ, we just have to think which organ are we targeting the most and where this treatment works best. And back to my patient. What we know about imatinib is that it inhibits TGF, PDGF, and which are involved in fibrotic diseases, as it is chronic GVHD and systemic scleroderma, for example. And it's not something new, because imatinib was evaluated 15 years ago in phase 2 study, published in Blood in 39 patients, but the responses were not impressive. There was only partial remission or minimal response, with best responses in lung, gut, and skin GVHD. And I was interested, did anybody try the combination of imatinib and ECP? I found only this French report of only 7 patients, but interesting still group, because these were sclerotic GVHD patients who received imatinib and ECP, and actually the result was complete remission in 57%, which is pretty impressive in sclerotic GVHD, with a possibility to continue steroids in all patients. So I was trying to find this not to promote this treatment, but only to try to find an explanation why the treatment in my patient worked. But as I said, I think the ECP future is definitely in combination treatment, and especially attractive methods to be looked at in patients with risk of infections, in patients with risk of relapse, because these are also patients, for example, with MRD, mixed chimerism, where we do not want to increase this risk, to improve those partial responses and also overall responses, so to improve the refractoriness to second lines that we have now available, in order also to quickly taper these immunosuppressive treatments, and in order, of course, to quickly taper off steroids. And of course, having in mind biology of GVHD and not combining 2 treatments that work in the same way, but trying to find the ones that work synergistically. So with this, I thank you.